Well, good morning everybody, and thank you very much to Aisling for all that that you presented in such an encouraging way and challenging us to do something as well. I have worked I've worked with Palestinians and with Israelis in Palestine as an ecumenical accompanier, and I also work on the Pax Christi International Working Group in solidarity with people in Palestine. When I first went to Palestine, everybody talked to me about the occupation, and they also always mentioned hope. Despite the awfulness of all they told us, and all that they showed us of colonisation, of occupation, oppression, and the daily injustices and violations of international law, they talked about having hope. I actually wondered where they found that hope, because every day everything seemed stacked up against them. But in listening and in more visits and learning more, it was quite clear that their hope was being expressed as part of their faith, whether Christian or Muslim. Over many years of visiting and being with people and listening more, I noticed that there were far fewer mentions of hope, and I felt in the communities a growing and communal depression. As violence against Palestinians increased, any notion of peace talks being real disappeared, and the silence of the international community was and is deafening. When I'm asked about Palestine today, I can say that the planned theft of land, the violence, the demolition of homes, and the targeting, torture and imprisonment of children and young people is worse every day. And still, the international community says little and does nothing to call Israel to account. When I was asked to do this presentation, I agreed, because we promised that we would tell the stories of the people that we met. But I actually thought that finding much to say was going to be very difficult. PowerPoint's gone back to Aisling. Aisling donated me some of her time because she said she wouldn't take up so much time, so she donated it to me. We do that, we share a lot in Pax Christi. When I went to start doing this, and I said I thought I would find it difficult to say anything, I thought, well, it's not for, I know where I see the hope, but I asked Palestinian friends in Palestine where they found hope. And now what's difficult is not being able to show you all the photos and all the things that they told me. The olive tree, widely known as a symbol of peace, it's also a powerful symbol of Palestinian rootedness in the land. And here you see the planting of olive trees, some ancient olive trees in the village where I worked, and the tending of them, and then the shared picnics that people have. Muhammad said, when armed gangs invaded the Palestinian villages in 1948, my grandparents decided to leave, but my great-grandfather refused to be parted from his olive trees. Our conflict is about the land, and the trees and the olive oil are powerful tools that we use to share our story. It's a form of non-violent resistance. Since the Israeli occupation of the West Bank in 1967, Palestinian farmers have lost hundreds and thousands of trees. Trees planted and cared for by generations of the same family have been destroyed and uprooted as Israeli settlers seek to claim Palestinian land as their own. Despite the uprooting, cutting down and burning of olive trees by those settlers, Palestinians continue to plant and nurture new seedlings and to plant new trees. In solidarity, internationals buy olive trees to donate, and some go out, as I know Jeff does and many others here, go out to accompany the families in the planting and the harvesting, and share in those family lunches and the generous hospitality that everybody offers. There is huge hope in that. Despite the loss and possibility of even further destruction, the trees are planted and cared for. Living for thousands of years and with the capacity to regenerate, the olive tree is often used to describe the Palestinian concept of sumud, deep, deep rootedness, existing despite everything. Steadfastness is a word that they often use. To exist is to resist. We will stay. The wall, the military towers, the fences, the barbed wire, the checkpoints, all over the West Bank that we see as we travel, and yet still you see hope. In Palestine, I see hope in the people, in the families and in the communities that I visit. And in this community like L'Arche in Bethlehem, where you can see that people feel cared for and are treated with respect. And of course many of you will recognise the felted goods that we have on stalls, and you may bring them out at Christmas. And please remember the community when you do that. Every Palestinian town has refugee camps from 1948. In Bethlehem there are 3. And this is Ida Camp. In all of them, there are community projects that provide opportunities for meeting together, for education, for sport and drama, and for so much more. And here, on the wall, at the entrance to Ida Camp, something inside so strong. And that really is true of the Palestinian people. The key, the hope of returning to their homes that they were turned out of with great violence in 1948. The decorating of the little simple classrooms that they have for the little ones, the greening of their area in this crowded refugee camp, the teaching of music and art. Just checking. Zubi from Wiam, who some of you will know, said, "I see hope in the future generation who have the opportunity to do new things. We need to help our children to stay here. Those who work with youth give me hope. I too see hope in the schools, in the commitment that families have to ensure the education of their children, girls and boys. And the teachers, unlike many of us here, often have to physically protect their students from the appalling violence of the Israeli military, and will do anything that they can, including putting their own lives in danger to do that." Yesterday we heard the story of the Good Samaritan, and we talked about the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Along either side of that road live small communities of the Jahalim Bedouin, and these are some of them here, living in shacks, living without water, without electricity, without amenities. And they're in the shadow of Maladumin, one of the biggest settlers, illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank, who have all the amenities that they need. The Comboni sisters, who I think are wonderful, have been supporting these communities for many years, and they have ensured that some of these little communities, about 9 of them, have kindergartens. They're very simple, but there is amazing joy, both in the kindergartens with the children, but also in their families, who are encouraged to take part, and the women are being trained to be teachers of those kindergartens. And again, as you go around, you see hope. Youth of Samud are young Palestinians who live just south of Hebron, just on the outskirts of it, one of the most violent places in the West Bank. They constantly challenge the occupation, and they work alongside families whose homes are being demolished, which is a daily happening in the West Bank, and certainly where they live. Their home is constantly raided by the Israeli military. They're beaten up, they're imprisoned, they're detained and treated incredibly badly. But they continue to do that work. They challenge the soldiers. They stand alongside the people and try to prevent the demolition of the homes. They are there providing that hope and security and solidarity that people need. And two Pax Christi partners and friends in Bethlehem of many are the Sumud Story House of the Arab Education Institute and WIAM, the Conflict Transformation Centre. And they work with, they're very near the checkpoint in Bethlehem. They see violence every day, they often are tear gassed, as are the people who visit, and they stand as something very special near that checkpoint. They work with Christians and Muslims, with children, with young people and family groups to share stories, to eat together, to form a choir, to plant gardens with fruit trees and beautiful flowers. They're trying to offer small employment opportunities with the embroidery and the olive wood and catering, and both offer hospitality to anybody who goes past. You can go in for a cup of tea. And Rania from the Sumud Story House said, "We create spaces of encouragement." We create spaces of encouragement, development and conversations that accompany people in their growth. Local craftsmen and women, farmers and brewers, nobody can go to the West Bank and not have Taipei beer and Cremisan wine. It's absolutely essential that you support the economy. Unfortunately, you can't, they have difficulty in importing it, but we can buy the Palestinian produce from Zaytun, all the food goods that are so delicious. And of course we can support the craftspeople who make the wonderful olive wood things that so many of us have in our homes. The wall. The wall is 30 foot high, it's ugly, it imprisons things and it prevents people from going to their homes, to health, to education and to visit families or even to attend funerals. But it is transformed everywhere you go. It's covered in graffiti. I love the graffiti on the wall. There's so much there. There are statements, there's challenges, there are quotes from scripture, there are pictures, as you see here, and they record the names of the people who have died. And you see there Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed a few weeks ago, who is actually the cousin of one of our friends in one of the centres. And then that picture of looking to see if you can see the hope that you will see through the wall, that wonderful picture of looking through to Jerusalem, which of course they can't see from inside Bethlehem near the wall, and of course the hope that the wall will fall. Rania said, reviving our Sumud is done through our heritage, our music, our art, and working in unity with love and faith. There are joint communities of Israelis and Palestinians in Israel because you can't do that in the West Bank. And the hand-in-hand schools and the Wahat Salam and Never Shalom work together. So the two communities that work together, learning together, being educated together, listening to each other, make a huge difference, both within the schools, and they share each other's feast days, a real sign of hope there. And then the Jewish-Israeli, the Jewish-Israeli solidarity. Israeli, Palestinian, confused me. Women in Black, Breaking the Silence, the Israeli Refuser Network and Rabbis for Human Rights, ICAD and so many others. Israelis, Jewish people who work against the occupation, who stand out. And Nora Kami has said, hope is in those in Israel who refuse to serve in the army and stand in solidarity, demanding equal rights for all. Solidarity is important. Yet the young refuseniks who refuse to go in the army deserve our support and help, because it's a very brave thing at 18 to say you won't go into the Israeli military. And that's one of the young women who has done that and been imprisoned for refusing to join the military. There are those religious communities who are in solidarity too. They are there alongside people, providing oases of quiet, but also being there and working with others. Accompaniment too, I think, is a very important part of peacemaking, and it does give hope, because we're told that. As ecumenical accompaniers from around the world, people serve in different communities under threat. They're there to tell the stories, to watch, to record, and to provide the evidence that is needed. And then the Palestinians who have joined the community peacemakers, they used to be called the Christian peacemakers, but when internationals couldn't go, the young Palestinians joined in the work of taking children to school and of being there alongside them, which is really good to see the young Palestinians being able to do that, because of course they're threatened more by the Israeli military than we would be as internationals. And of course our presence and prayer is really important. That moment when Pope Francis made an unscheduled stop and stopped to pray against that ugly wall where the Israeli military are very often throwing tear gas was so important, and is recorded all the time. Every Friday, a group of people, whether small or large, prays at the wall in Bethlehem, at that icon of Mary who is weeping on the wall, walking from the military tower down to the icon saying the rosary, and when we're there we join them. And we have from Pax Christi has invited everybody to join on Friday night as the sun goes down to pray for peace. And we gather with all those who work and pray for a just peace in Palestine and Israel. And of course going and seeing is important, but going and seeing and being with the people, not just to do what I call a holy tour, and I hope people will forgive me for saying that, but it's about going to hear and see the living stones, and to listen to their stories and then to tell those stories. And this wonderful anemone, the Palestinian anemone, is one that pops up all over the place, in demolitions, when you in the middle of the rubble of people's homes, by the checkpoints and everywhere else. This wonderful sign of hope and of new life pops up. A sunset over the desert and the Dead Sea. And Zupi said, hope is like the sunrise. No power on earth can ignore the sunrise of hope. And of course, our hope is in the children. It's in and for the future, which is the children. And I want to quote from a journalist and activist who lives in Masafa Yatta, which is under threat of demolition all the time at the moment, because they want to cleanse the whole area of the people who live there. Decades of asking for justice from the occupier really exhausted us. It proved to be useless. Decades of showing that this is my only home, that I have no other place to go, that you are committing a war crime against us. Our only hope now is for the international community to pressure the Israeli government and Israeli Ministry of Defense, and I would add, and our government too. And he says, I draw power from the different people all around the world who support our struggle. I have met and talked to hundreds of people, and it gives me hope that people are taking actions in order to stop the evacuation of my home, Masafa Yatta. So for sure this gives me hope and gives me power. So we have seen and we have heard, and we act in solidarity and struggle, and by we I mean all of us. We want to change the systems that cause the injustice, and we use all those signs of hope to do it. In this case, the justice is the occupation, and we must work to end the occupation. And Usama said, hope is the power to believe that the justice, peace, freedom, and ending the occupation is possible. And the last word goes to Nora Kami, who says, I believe that hope is human beings finally understanding and doing the will of God to preserve the dignity of everyone. Together we can make it, and I believe we can, and we have to hang on to that. In a few weeks' time, in September actually, it's going to be the World Week for Peace in Palestine and Israel. And can I ask you to take cards as you go out of the hall? The beautiful one with the anemone on has a lovely prayer, and by Jan Such-Bickard, and to use that with your communities. And the new prayer has an affirmation on it, which is about change coming, and that's what we have to believe. If we have hope, we have to believe that change is possible. And the other one, blooms, not bombs, reminding of that refugee camp. The Three Counties Agricultural Show has an weapons, arms fair. And we would ask you to take one of these and to send it to stop it, that we can have flowers instead of bombs. Thank you very much.